I walked into the office that morning with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The milestone was complete. The recovery program I had built had saved the company millions, and today was the day my $450,000 bonus was supposed to hit. I even allowed myself a rare smile on the elevator ride up, thinking maybe all the nights I spent combing through ledgers and chasing down discrepancies were finally recognized. For once. The sacrifice felt worth it. The email landed at 9:01. Subject line, compensation adjustment. My eyes skimmed the text once, twice, then froze on the phrase, bonus voided due to strategic reallocation. The words blurred. Void, reallocation. My bonus wasn't delayed. It wasn't pending approval. It was gone. The words blurred into silence. I realized, sometimes we can't control how others treat our worth, but we can control how we treat ourselves. Now, let's close your eyes for 10 seconds. Breathe deeply, and let your body reset before you keep listening. Let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in the very place you gave your all. Heart pounding. I left my desk and followed the sound of applause down the hall. The executive suite was buzzing. Martin Kellor, our CEO, stood in the center, his voice booming as if the walls themselves were an audience. Beside him was his son, Chase, grinning with the smug ease of someone who had never fought for anything. Martin raised a champagne glass. To Chase, he declared, for his vision, his leadership, his bold pivot. The crowd clapped politely. Then Martin handed him an envelope, the exact amount I had just lost. It felt like a public stripping, as if every late night and every personal sacrifice had been erased with one gesture. I was invisible, but the humiliation burned as if a spotlight was pinned directly on me. I turned back to my desk, every step heavier than the last. I pulled up the HR system, needing to see for myself. The log was still there, plain as daylight. User M. Keller. Action, terminate bonus agreement. Timestamp 8:44 a.m. He hadn't delegated it. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. The CEO himself had pressed the button that erased my reward and handed it to his son. The applause still echoed faintly through the walls, but to me it sounded like static, hollow and cruel. My bonus was gone, my dignity stolen, and the man responsible didn't even flinch. I wasn't just an employee at Ardenvale Systems. I was the architect behind the quiet machinery that kept the company's money from bleeding out. As Director of Revenue Assurance, I designed the frameworks that stopped fraud, flagged anomalies, and clawed back millions that would have otherwise slipped through unnoticed. I didn't chase headlines or stand on stages with champagne. I built order out of chaos. And for years, I took pride in knowing that my invisible work made the numbers real. But pride, I've learned, can be a double-edged thing. For every dollar I recovered, there was a moment of life I quietly surrendered. I missed 6 of my daughter's birthdays in a row, always promising her I'd make it up next weekend. But the weekend never came. She grew from a child who made me paper crowns into a teenager who stopped waiting by the door, because she knew I wouldn't be home before midnight. My mother's illness only made the sacrifices sharper. I would sit in the hospital chair, laptop balanced on my knees, reviewing contracts while she slept through the soft hum of machines. I told myself that all of it mattered, that the loyalty I gave the company would one day mean stability for them, for us. That was the story I believed, the one I told myself whenever exhaustion clawed at my ribs. But standing in my office after that announcement, listening to the applause still faintly echo through the walls for Chase Keller, I felt the story begin to unravel. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the framed certificates on the wall. Recognition, achievement, numbers tied neatly with my name. They looked hollow now, as if the ink itself had thinned. Pride couldn't mask the bitterness swelling in my throat. I had given years of my life, and in return, my worth had been shifted into someone else's pocket, Someone who had never missed a dinner, never held a sick parent's hand while answering emails, never learned what it cost to keep the machine running. As I shuffled the stack of papers on my desk, something caught my eye. A yellow post-it note tucked beneath my keyboard. The handwriting was unfamiliar, hurried, almost as if whoever left it hadn't wanted to be seen. The words, nothing more. Check escrow logs. My pulse quickened. Escrow was where the truth lived, immutable, guarded, beyond the reach of HR edits and champagne speeches. I held the note between my fingers, turning it over, wondering who had slipped it there, and why they wanted me to look. Pride had carried me this far. Bitterness had kept me standing. But now something colder stirred. Suspicion. The applause had ended. The building was quiet again. And in that quiet, with the post-it pressed in my hand, I realized the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The post-it note burned in my pocket all afternoon, the words circling in my head like a drumbeat. Check escrow logs. When the office finally thinned out and the last hum of voices faded from the hallway, I opened the secured portal. My fingers moved quickly, my mind sharper than my pulse. If someone had gone to the trouble of warning me, I knew there was something buried here, something they hadn't managed to erase. The contract addendum blinked into view on the screen. It was plain. Clinical. A document I had written myself 2 years earlier to protect not only my bonus, but the company's integrity. I traced the clauses line by line, almost whispering the words to myself as if they were a vow. The language was airtight. Funds placed in escrow could only be released with the trustee's verification and my countersignature. No substitution, no delegation, no override. My name was the key. Without it, the money sat locked, untouchable. Cold certainty settled over me. They could void HR records, circulate memos, or make grand speeches in the executive lounge. But none of that changed what was on this page. Legally, structurally, mathematically, the bonus was still mine. I clicked into the system activity logs, searching for anomalies, and there it was, a deletion entry timestamped at 8:44 that morning, manual override. The entry didn't hide behind vague language or system codes. It carried one name, Martin Keller. He had logged in himself and attempted to scrub the addendum from the record. I stared at the line for a long moment, my jaw tightening, while I sat at my desk preparing for the day. Martin had been in a closed-door meeting with his son. At the very same minute, he toasted Chase's so-called achievement. He had been deleting the proof of my labor. The arrogance was almost surgical. He hadn't even bothered to mask his trail. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor throwing hard light against the wall. The weight of humiliation from earlier drained into something sharper, colder. Bitterness was gone. Doubt was gone. What filled me now was resolve. I wasn't just angry, I was armed. They thought erasure was power. But I had built the very systems that proved erasure was nothing but noise. The addendum wasn't gone. The escrow stood. And now I had evidence, undeniable, time-stamped evidence, that the CEO himself had tried to manipulate the system. I closed the portal, slipped the post-it back into the drawer, and shut down my computer. The applause from earlier seemed distant now, almost laughable. Martin and Chase had raised their glasses to a theft, convinced the story ended there. But the story was still being written, and I had the pen. The morning after my discovery, the office felt different, not louder, not quieter, just heavier. Like the air itself had thickened. People passed my desk with a strained politeness reserved for someone standing on thin ice. No one met my eyes. Conversations hushed when I entered the break room, and chairs scraped back just slightly farther than usual. It wasn't open hostility, but something worse. Avoidance. They knew what had happened in that executive lounge. They knew the bonus had been reassigned. And maybe they knew I had started looking into it. I sat down, opening a spreadsheet I had no interest in reading, just to anchor my hands. The tension threaded through me like static. Every keystroke sounded too sharp, every silence too long. I wasn't paranoid. The culture here thrived on whispers. Martin ruled with spectacle, big speeches, grand gestures. But the real control came from fear. People learned quickly that silence was safer than truth. Near noon, Elena Voss, one of the controllers, approached my cubicle. She was calm by nature, with a voice that always sounded as if she were explaining a recipe, not a ledger. She leaned against the divider, eyes fixed on the hallway, as if she weren't really talking to me at all. "Check batch 3142, she said softly, sliding a small sticky note onto my desk. "Contingency transfer. Doesn't look right." I froze, my pulse drumming. She didn't linger. She just pushed off the divider and walked away, never turning back. I waited until the floor had settled, until keyboards clicked in their ordinary rhythm, then opened the ledger. Batch 3142. The line item was buried, disguised as a project contingency expense. At first glance, it looked unremarkable, but the routing numbers pulled me in deeper, leading to a shell account I didn't recognize. I traced the path step by step, each click making my throat tighter. And then it unfolded. The receiving entity wasn't just another vendor or contractor. It was a private venture fund, one that public records showed had a silent partner. The name on that partnership agreement was Chase Kellor. The screen seemed to glow hotter, the letters sharper. A contingency transfer, they called it. In reality, it was my bonus, rerouted and laundered through a fund that Chase himself stood to profit from. The theft wasn't symbolic anymore. It was literal, documented, sitting right there in the numbers. I sat back, forcing myself to breathe evenly, though my chest felt locked. The office noises, phones ringing, printers spitting pages, sounded distant, unreal. Around me, people carried on as if everything was normal. But under the surface, something was breaking. My bonus had become their hush money. My silence had been priced and paid for. I glanced toward Martin's corner office. Blinds half closed, light spilling in narrow stripes across the carpet. He was in there with Chase, laughing. The sound carried faintly down the hall. And in that moment, unease hardened into something else. I knew now this wasn't incompetence or clerical error. It was deliberate. They hadn't just erased me from the story. They'd sold my name, my labor, and my worth, packaged into a transfer that lined Chase's pockets. The warning came wrapped in corporate politeness, but the threat was clear. HR summoned me into a glass-walled office just before lunch, a tight smile plastered on the manager's face as he delivered his lines. "Ms. Pierce," he began, "there's concern you may be engaging in unnecessary inquiries into internal adjustments. It would be wise to let the matter rest. Stop digging, or your position will vanish too." The words hit harder than I expected. I had known Martin would push back, but hearing the message delivered so bluntly, through the very department meant to protect employees, left me hollow. My job, my livelihood, even my identity inside these walls, suddenly felt fragile, like a thread one sharp tug could snap. I walked back to my desk in silence, forcing my expression into neutrality while inside I churned with panic. Had it all been for nothing? Years of sacrifices, the nights alone in sterile offices, the birthdays missed, the hospital visits cut short. Could it all collapse into nothing more than a line on HR's termination record? The answer came faster than I wanted. That afternoon, Martin convened a department meeting. Chase strutted into the room late, sliding into the chair at the head of the table as if he had earned the right. When Martin turned the floor over to him, Chase didn't speak about strategy or performance. Instead, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and smirked in my direction. "Let's be clear," he said loudly enough for every corner of the room to hear. "Bonus or no bonus, you'll always work for me." The room went quiet. The silence pressed on me from every side, like walls closing in. I felt the burn of humiliation crawl up my neck, but no one spoke up. No one protested. They stared at the table, their laptops, their phones, anywhere but at me. His words weren't just an insult, they were a declaration. In front of my peers, Chase had reduced me to nothing more than his subordinate, a tool he could wield or discard at will. For a moment, despair wrapped around me like chains. I considered what it would mean to stop, to pack up my desk, to walk out quietly, to let them write the ending. Maybe silence would protect what little I had left. Then my phone buzzed. A new message appeared from an unknown number. "Check admin log tonight. Don't use company Wi-Fi." I stared at the screen. My breath caught between dread and hope. Someone was watching, someone new. The despair didn't vanish. It clung heavy, but a small crack opened in the wall, pressing against me. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone. Maybe there was still another chapter waiting to be written. That evening, after the office lights dimmed and the hum of conversation gave way to silence, I stayed behind. Despair had pressed me down earlier, but now a steadier current carried me forward. Fear had its place, but fear alone couldn't erase the facts. And facts were my language. I logged into the secured systems, the glow of the monitor reflecting across the empty cubicles. One by one, I began pulling the receipts. First came the DocuSign certificate, digital proof that the addendum requiring my countersignature had been executed, time-stamped, and sealed. The file was incorruptible, a locked vault of metadata that no executive flourish could undo. Next was the ACH trace, the banking breadcrumb trail. It showed the funds flowing from Ardenvale's treasury to escrow, right on schedule, tied to the recovery milestone I had achieved. Every digit, every routing number, lined up exactly as it should. They could claim reallocation, but the trail betrayed the truth. The money had been mine, secured, waiting. Finally, I downloaded the trustee's statement, a clean PDF with its unassuming letterhead. The trustee had verified the deposit, confirmed the condition, and noted the one requirement, my countersignature to release. It was all there, black and white, undeniable. I printed each document, feeding the pages into a folder I kept by my side. The sound of the printer was oddly grounding, each sheet sliding into the tray like a heartbeat. By the time I was done, the folder was thick, solid in my hands, evidence you could hold had a weight no speech could rival. But I wasn't finished. The anonymous text echoed in my mind. "Check admin log tonight." I accessed the deeper system, layers most employees never touched. The log file wasn't obvious. It was buried in a directory with bland labels, designed to discourage curious eyes. Still, I knew how to read the architecture. I followed the path, step by step, until the hidden record blinked onto my screen. There it was, a deletion entry stamped with the date of my bonus's erasure, and beside it, not a proxy account or a generic ID, but the unmistakable username, M. Keller. The CEO hadn't delegated. He hadn't cloaked the attempt. He had logged in with his own admin credentials and tried to wipe the addendum from existence. I stared at the line of text, the quiet proof of arrogance, for a moment. I let the weight of it sink in. Earlier that day, I had felt cornered, humiliated, diminished. But here, in plain code, was the evidence that everything I suspected was real. I closed the folder, slid the documents inside my bag, and shut down the monitor. My heart was steady now, my mind clear. They thought they could bury me in silence, but I had the receipts, and I would decide when to speak. The investor dining room gleamed under low golden lights, every table polished to a sheen that reflected the silver cutlery and carefully poured wine. Martin loved settings like this, lavish, performative, carefully staged to make him look indispensable. Tonight was no different. He stood at the head of the long table, beaming as though nothing in the company's history had ever shone brighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, raising his glass, "we are here not just to review numbers, but to celebrate the future of Ardenvale, and that future." He gestured toward Chase seated beside him. "Rests in the capable hands of our next generation of leaders." Polite applause rippled down the table, though it lacked conviction. Chase leaned back in his chair, smiling smugly, one hand draped across the backrest as if he already owned the room. I sat near the far end, my folder heavy on my lap, my pulse a drumbeat against my ribs. Every second Martin spoke felt stretched, taut, like a wire ready to snap. I thought of the documents in my bag, the certificates, the traces, the log stamped with his name, cold proof hidden beneath linen napkins, and the weight of my silence. As Martin continued, praising Chase's strategic pivot and bold vision, the bile rose in my throat. He was rewriting history in front of the very people whose trust kept this company alive. And no one dared challenge it. Not yet. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my water glass. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, a single note cutting through the rehearsed speech. My voice followed before I could hesitate. "Point of order," the room stilled. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Martin's words trailed off, his smile tightening as his eyes found me at the end of the table. "I need to address the matter of the milestone recovery bonus," I said, steadying my tone. "The escrow clause tied to that bonus remains active. It requires my counter-signature for release. No one else's, not even yours." Gasps fluttered across the room. Chase shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering for the first time. The silence held until a voice, clear and firm, broke it. Harriet Lowe, one of the longest-standing investors, leaned forward, her gaze locked on Martin. She had weathered decades in boardrooms like this and carried the authority of someone who had seen every trick. "Has the trustee received her countersignature?" Harriet asked plainly. The question landed like a gavel. All eyes turned to Martin. His jaw tightened, his rehearsed confidence slipping at the edges. For the first time all evening, his performance cracked. The tension in the room shifted, no longer aimed at me, but at him. My heartbeat thundered. Yet beneath it was something steadier, the knowledge that I had just pulled the thread, and everyone here was watching to see what unraveled next. The silence after Harriet's question was brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Martin tried to recover, clearing his throat and forcing a smile. "This isn't the time for administrative details," he said. "We're here to celebrate the bigger vision." I didn't give him the chance to spin further. I rose from my seat, sliding the folder onto the table, and opened it with deliberate calm. The papers spread like cards in a game he thought he controlled. "The escrow clause was never removed," I said evenly. "It states that the funds tied to the recovery milestone require two things: the trustee's verification and my countersignature. Without it, the money does not move. Not to contingency, not to Chase, not to anyone." My voice was cool, steady. I wasn't pleading for fairness. I was stating fact, like a surgeon explaining a diagnosis. The investors leaned closer, their interest sharpening. I held up the trustee's statement. The verification was delivered. The escrow account was funded. But there has been no countersignature, because mine is the only one that matters. And I haven't given it. Martin's jaw tightened, but before he could interrupt, I slid another page forward. This is the system log. It shows a manual deletion attempt at 8:44 a.m., the morning of the announcement. The username attached is not a proxy, Not a clerical ID. It was yours. Martin. Gasps rippled down the table. The CEO's composure thinned, his smile faltering as eyes turned toward him like searchlights. Elena, seated a few chairs down, spoke up. Her voice was calm, but her words cut clean. I reviewed those logs myself. The deletion didn't succeed. It only left a record. Legally and operationally, the escrow addendum still stands. Any redistribution of those funds without Miss Pierce's countersignature is unlawful. The weight of her statement pressed into the room. Investors who had been silent now murmured, some scribbling notes, others whispering to their aides. Then came the twist neither Martin nor Chase expected. A younger investor, one of the newest faces at the table, opened his laptop and tapped quickly. I have access to the trustee's dashboard, he announced. His tone calm, but edged with curiosity. The room leaned in as the screen's glow illuminated his face. I'm looking at the account right now. The funds are still locked, exactly as she said. The confirmation landed like a hammer, all pretense drained from the air. The applause of yesterday, the speeches, the toasts, all revealed as hollow theater against the immovable truth of a locked account. I remained standing, hands resting lightly on the folder, cold, unyielding. I let the silence stretch. Every second was a vice closing tighter around Martin's throat. And for the first time, it wasn't me who felt trapped. The tension in the room snapped tighter when the young investor's laptop confirmed what I had said. The funds were still locked. Martin's jaw worked, his practiced smile gone. And in the silence that followed, Chase leaned forward with a scoff. This is a waste of time, he sneered, his voice dripping arrogance. Money moves through contingency accounts every day. Everyone at this table knows that. My fund just happened to be in position to stabilize things. It's called leadership. The words hung heavy, his smug grin widening, as though explanation alone could wipe away the truth. But the documents in front of me, and the light from the laptop across the table, told a story his bravado could not erase. I pushed a sheet forward, the routing trail printed clean and undeniable. Stabilization? I said coolly. The ACH transfer from Treasury didn't land in a contingency pool. It landed in your fund, Chase, a fund where you are listed as a silent partner. Gasps stirred the room. Louder this time. Martin shifted in his chair, but Harriet Lowe was already leaning forward, her sharp eyes cutting through the smoke of Chase's posturing. That fund, she said, her voice clear, was flagged last quarter for risk exposure. We advised against tying any company transfers to it. Martin, you signed off on the warning report yourself, and yet here we are, funds rerouted, risks ignored, all while your son profits. Do you care to explain why? Martin's composure cracked fully then, his hands clenched on the table, knuckles white against the polished wood. It was temporary, he stammered. A strategic bridge until the bonus could be reallocated properly. No, Harriet snapped back, her tone like iron. It was theft dressed as strategy, and it was negligence at best, deliberate misrepresentation at worst. The investors murmured louder now, notes scribbling, eyes darting between Martin and me. The confidence he had wrapped himself in all evening was unraveling thread by thread. Chase tried again, puffing his chest, but the swagger sounded thinner, desperate. You're all overreacting. This is politics, not finance. My father has built this company. That may be true, another investor interrupted, his voice low but firm. But if she walks, we walk too. He tilted his head toward me, making the meaning unmistakable. The room went silent again, the statement cutting through every layer of performance. Martin looked around the table, searching for allies and finding none. Each investor avoided his eyes now, their focus shifting instead to the evidence spread across the table and the woman who had laid it there. His legacy, his control, was dissolving right in front of him. The humiliation on his face was stark. The once celebrated CEO, the man who thrived on spectacle, was cornered not by shouts or outrage, but by quiet facts he could not erase. The weight of it pressed down on him, visible in the slump of his shoulders, the tremor of his fingers against his glass. I remained silent, watching. The collapse was not loud, it was slow, suffocating, undeniable. And in that silence, Martin Keller finally looked small. The vote happened faster than I expected. Slips of paper passed from hand to hand, pens scratching with finality. The air was charged but oddly quiet, like the hush before a storm breaks. When the count was finished, Harriet announced the result without flourish. Effective immediately, Martin Keller is removed from his position as CEO. The words hung in the room, heavier than any toast, louder than any applause. Martin sat rigid, his face drained of the authority he once commanded. Chase, usually quick with a smirk or a jab, stared down at the table, his mouth pressed into silence. For the first time, he had no performance, no arrogance, just the hollow realization that the stage had vanished beneath him. Harriet turned toward me, her voice gentler now. "Talia, the board will need steady leadership. I believe you could take the chair." I met her gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. For years, I had lived in the shadows of numbers, building rules that others ignored, holding the line when no one else would. And yet, I knew what I wanted. Slowly, I shook my head. "I don't want the stage," I said softly, but firmly. "I want the rules to outlast us." There was no applause, no gasp, only a ripple of understanding. For once, silence felt like respect. I gathered my folder, stood, and walked toward the door. In the hallway, a small group of employees were at work, unscrewing the brass plate from the CEO's office door. The letters that once spelled Martin Keller, Chief Executive Officer, clattered softly into a box, as ordinary as discarded hardware. Downstairs, the late afternoon sun poured through the glass walls of the lobby. The McLaren Chase loved to flaunt gleamed under the light, its polished surface catching 1,000 reflections. But to me, it looked like nothing more than metal and glass, a monument to ego already forgotten. In my hand, the trustee's confirmation letter rested solid, tangible, proof that integrity had prevailed over arrogance, that even when they tried to erase me, the truth had held, for the first time in years. I felt no tension, no bitterness, only relief. Sometimes victory doesn't look like taking the throne. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your dignity intact, knowing the rules you wrote could not be broken. And now I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, only to find strength in the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tap like if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories that remind us why integrity still matters.